Hello, welcome to my latest video. So for this video, I've been messing around with a lot of the 2D animation tools that the new Blender version has brought. And I just noticed some stuff that was like a bit confusing, some stuff that I wasted a lot of time on, and I'm hoping that I can save you guys some time. Okay, so first thing that we want to do is, usually you're pretty much stuck in the same viewport. I prefer to use the front orthographic viewport, and you can access that by pressing 1 on your numpad, or by simply clicking the backside of the y-axis over here. Now I'll switch us to front orthographic. Okay, so let's delete this cube. We don't really need the cube. So by pressing Shift A, I pressed X to delete, by the way, just left click it, press X to delete. So I use Shift A and then I go to Grease Pencil, and you just want to add a basic stroke. And since working on this Grease Pencil stroke will just give you all the functionality. So there's a couple of core concepts that work here. First, what we want to do is we want to go to Draw Mode. And this will give us access to some of the tools here. Okay, so there's two core underlying principles beneath all of this. If any of you are familiar with Photoshop, you know all about layers, but I'm just going to pretend that you're not. So layer is really what decides what is on top and what gets rendered below. So the higher, for example, lines will get rendered above colors. So whatever is highlighted gray, that layer is what new drawings will be created upon. So for example, I'll just go to colors. I'm just going to select the red material, and I'm just going to do this. And you can see as soon as I finish that, it was rendered below the basic stroke because the basic stroke was on the lines. And I know that because if I click this eye, it hides and unhides everything on that layer. So make use of the layers. Layers are super useful, and at first I really wasn't aware of this functionality, and I was just putting everything on the same layer, and it was a nightmare for organizing stuff, and stuff that I wanted to appear above was appearing below, and all of that. So for example, here I can make a new layer. I can just call it, I don't know, whatever. And now whatever I draw on whatever is going to appear on top of everything. So let me just switch back to the material panel, go over to blue, and okay, there we go. And you can see now that whatever I draw on whatever, that's a little confusing, appears on top of everything. Although there's a bit of blending here. And then again, if I just go back over to layers and I click the eye icon, you'll notice that everything on the layer is disappearing and reappearing. Okay, let's erase everything. Much like the Sculpt tool, if you press F, that lets you increase and decrease the size of whatever of the eraser tool. And it also goes through layers, so that's kind of nice. Okay, let's switch back to colors. Now the next really core concept is the materials. So whenever you start whenever you had a grease pencil stroke, as we did before, it starts off with these 6 basic materials: black, white, red, green, blue, gray. And honestly, it's just a bit too much clutter for me, so I'll just probably delete everything except for black, and then go over back to the pen tool. Okay, so we'll go over this later. Okay, so now the name has nothing to do with the actual color. It's just good to remember. So I could call this like happy. And then you'll notice when I draw, it's still black. So there's a couple of simple but important concepts. So right now, stroke is filled in. So the stroke color is black, the line is solid, and the mode type is line. So you'll see when I draw with it, it's just, it's a stroke. So now, let's say I wanted to let's say I make a circle. And let's say this was supposed to be somebody's head. Now you'll notice that the head isn't filled in with anything. But there's actually a built-in way to do that. So I'm just going to make a new material. I'm going to call this one head. And I'm going to make it red. And also, now I'm going to enable fill. Now you'll see when I draw head, the fill is black. And you can change this to any color you'd like. We can change it to blue even. And also, don't forget about the alpha value. If the alpha value is set to 0, you won't see anything. So I made that mistake a couple of times. Make sure your alpha value is 1 if you actually want to see it. Otherwise, you could just leave it at 0. And so the cool thing about fill is that it automatically tries to kind of fill in the area between the stroke. Now, this is useful except when it's not, and I'll give you a case when it's not. If you're trying to draw a shape with a lot of curves, such as an S, this happens, and it's not pretty. So it's not a perfect tool, but if we're making like simple strokes where if there's not too many inflections in whatever stroke you're making, it's fine. But as soon as you try to get something a little more complex, then the fill function starts to fall apart. And that's, nothing's perfect, but there you go. Okay, moving on. So if you click this little arrow over here, you can modify the actual tool itself. So right now we're using pencil. This is a preset. And if you click on it, you can switch to block, ink, marker, noise, pen, pencil. So each of them just has, I'm not too familiar with the specific intricacies of each one, but suffice to say that they all have their uses. This is way too thick. Personally, I just stuck with ink. Yeah, as you can see, it does some interesting stuff here, like it sharpened that point. But here's what's important to know about this. You can enable a bunch of really useful features, such as if you go on stroke, if you click the stroke dropdown and you check in stabilize stroke, it actually ends this. It adds this effect here. Now you can see that there's a little tail behind my point, and only when my mouse gets far away enough from that tail does the stroke continue. This is very useful if you're drawing with a mouse, because it allows you to make really smooth strokes without having those little twitches that our hands naturally produce get in the way. And just a very useful feature. Highly recommend enabling this. So that's stabilize stroke. There's some other stuff like active smooths it a bit more. Radius is a radius. Strength, I'm guessing, is it's kind of like opacity. But for the most part, that's honestly everything you need to know about this. So yeah. Okay, moving on. So I'm actually going to get a bit into the animation aspects of it. So let's move this up. So the best way, Blender tries to interpolate between your drawings, but sometimes it doesn't do like an amazing job. So let me just draw like a ball here. Oh, and some extra information, you can go into edit mode, and the line is actually made up of a bunch of little vertices, which is kind of what it's comprised of, and in between is really what makes a stroke. You can manipulate these to an extent. For example, turning on what is this called again? Proportional editing helps, and then you can even combine them if you do like F will combine the stroke, so that can come in handy sometimes. Here, if I really wanted to be a perfectionist, I could use C for circle select, delete these in between strokes, and then here I've got so these actually were still able to be joined, and now I've deleted those annoying strokes in between there, and it looks a little better. So if we go to sculpt mode is really how you're going to be manipulating your vertices for animation, or at least it's one way that I've become comfortable with. So you can use smooth. Smooth is very useful just for smoothing out stuff. The larger the radius, the bigger the effect. And you can see here if I hold left click and I just run it along here a couple times, it's slowly making that a little bit smoother. You can also use grab and push to grab and push the stroke in different ways. So if I wanted to change the ball into like kind of like a smushed kind of impression here, I could do this. And again, I could apply the smoothing tool and you'll kind of see it fill out a bit. It has its own rules for how everything works. Oh, that became separated. I guess they weren't. There we go. They weren't filled after all. So it kind of has its own rules for how it works. And you just got to get familiar with it. And now I'll actually start to go into the animation. So basically, whenever you jump to another frame, I believe it makes its own keyframes automatically. So here we have to go to I think there we go. Dope sheet, grease pencil. So it's kind of like a subcategory of dope sheet is kind of the way it works. So anyway, you can see that there's already a keyframe here, and I never actually had to press I to insert a keyframe, which is kind of interesting, kind of cool. So first, let me just see if I can get this guy back to like a regular kind of ball shape, so I could just make a simple animation for you guys. Okay, there we go. So this is our initial keyframe, and I'm just going to make like a quick 100 frame animation. Unfortunately, looks like I'm gonna have to open up another window here with the regular old timeline since it's not letting me choose the limits of it. So I'm gonna go here to timeline, and I'm just gonna designate the end as 100 frames. Okay, let's push this back up. Okay, there we go. So yeah, you can have a little timeline window in here just so you could get, you can easily designate where it starts and ends. Okay, so again, I don't have to do anything at this point because it already inserts a keyframe whenever you make a change. So let me go to frame 50, and now I can start changing it, and this will basically be the second keyframe of our animation. So I'm imagining the ball is going to drop and it's going to smush a bit. Right now I'm only going to do animation keyframes, but you can actually go into object mode and manipulate the ball. And so you can manipulate the position and the curves. And usually that's probably what I think you'll want to be doing, since just using the animation keyframes can be sometimes insufficient because having to move the entire stroke through animation or through the sculpt tool is kind of annoying. It's much easier to just grab the thing in object mode, insert a positional keyframe, and then go back into the animation dope sheet and change the curves there. So here, as you can see, just by drawing, I've inserted a keyframe again. So, but there's no interpolating keyframes, but I'll go into that very soon. So here I can just click this keyframe and use Shift D if I wanted to return to its initial position. Okay, and the last step is inserting the interpolating keyframes. So if you go into draw mode, and there is a shortcut here. Okay. Draw, interpolate. Wait. Whoa, that's not it. Draw, interpolate, sequence. There we go. So it's draw, interpolate, sequence. And that's Shift Control E. Shift Control E. And so, yeah, interestingly enough, if you do Shift Control E, oh, it just does it. It's giving you some issues. Yeah, if you do Shift Control E in the timeline, it doesn't work. You have to have your cursor up in the main window. So that can be kind of confusing because you wouldn't think it would behave that way, but it does. You have to make sure to have your cursor up here in order for the Shift Control E to work. And yeah, wherever this little blue cursor is, that's the section where it's going to interpolate the keyframes. So there you go. Just a very basic interpolation of the strokes. Um, as you can see, it can get a bit wonky. I'll just do this real quick. I'll select everything here and delete it. You can just do whatever you want and expect it to figure out how to interpolate it. Like if I draw something like this, and boom, we've got the keyframe. And then I move over here, and let's say I even like erase this, and I just draw something else, like, I don't know, like a box. So you'd probably expect the circle to transform into the box, but, well, let's just see what happens. Okay, so it actually did a pretty good job this time. But as you can see, there's like a little rip there just because it gets kind of confused. And this can get even worse if you... Okay, let's erase this. If you draw like an even more complex shape, like let's draw like a hand. Let's see how it deals with that. And Shift Control E once again. And yeah, so now this is where the program can't really figure out what to do, and it just fails. Like it almost gets to the end, it's like, oh, it's getting there, and then it's like, oh, I'm just gonna skip and draw the rest of the hand. So yeah, that's why I like using the Sculpt tool, because you kind of preserve the overall geometry of the shape, and you end up usually getting the kind of shape you want. All right, that's the end of my tutorial. Hope you guys find it helpful. And make sure to like, subscribe, and donate to my Patreon and my... No, I can't make that joke. Okay, bye.